That's what the Beatles sang way back in the year 1964. And a year later, Pakistan fought its second war with India. Now, it seems that Pakistan has found this newfound love for India. What's the reason? You guessed it, it's money. We'll discuss Pakistan's sudden change of heart. Listen in first to what the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has said.
Pakistan has learned its lesson. We had 3 wars with India, 3. And the consequence of those wars, as a result, it only brought more miseries,
to the
unemployment,
two nations,
poverty, and millions were demoted from their level of satisfaction to a low level of satisfaction. Give my word of honor that we will be talking to Indians with sincerity of purpose, but it takes 2 to tango.
It takes 2 to tango, and they are hoping for dialogue, peace talks with India. That's what came out of that interview that the Pakistani Prime Minister was seen speaking in. Let's get perspective on this. Anil Trigunayat is the former ambassador joining us on the show, along with Michael Kugelman, Senior Associate for South Asia, Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Great to have you both with us, gentlemen. Michael, this statement from the Prime Minister of Pakistan comes at a time that the country is facing the severe economic crisis. Allies like China, world bodies like the International Monetary Fund all seem rather unwilling to help Pakistan out of its current economic mess. This is the time that we hear the Pakistani Prime Minister talk about how war is never going to solve problems and it's going to exacerbate economic concerns that the country already has. In your understanding, what are the options now that the government has to bail itself out? How precarious is their situation?
Well, thank you for having me. And Pakistan has been able to secure some assistance, particularly from several of its partners in the Gulf region. So it has been able to get some of the assistance it needs. It's still working with the IMF to try to get the latest tranche of funds. But indeed, it is very much in a very difficult spot. And I think we've seen its relations with China, which of course has long been one of its top allies, have faced some struggles over security issues, Chinese concerns about threats to their workers in Pakistan. And I think Pakistan's concluded that China is not a sure thing to provide badly needed economic assistance. But I should say that what the Prime Minister said today, it was not all that new. It actually reminded me a lot of what the previous Army Chief, General Bajwa, had said in his speech during the latter part of his term, in which he essentially called for better relations with Pakistan's neighbors, including India. But I think the most important thing here is not what the Prime Minister said in his interview, but the clarification that came from the Foreign Ministry after his interview, in which it said that we'd love to have discussions with India, but only after India reverses its move to with the Article 370 revocation in 2019. So again, nothing all that new in terms of what the Prime Minister said. This is what we had heard from the Army Chief, and it perhaps reflects how the current government continues to be in line with the establishment's views about this idea of looking to potential for improving relations with neighbors, but only if there's progress on the Kashmir front, as Pakistan sees it.
Yes, and that's a repetition again within that same interview, in the same breath, when he talks about peace talks, he's laid down conditions. And of course, as far as abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir, that's something that Pakistan has spoken against and continues to do that. So is there really a change of stance, Anil Trigunayat? Is there anything new that you're spotting in what the Pakistani Prime Minister has said? Yes, Saudi Arabia and UAE, like Michael is pointing out, they've repeatedly helped Pakistan in an attempt to get the economy back on track. But the economy is really showing no signs of revival just yet. So in your understanding, is there any palpable change in the Pakistani stance, as it were, deep as it is in an economic crisis?
Well, I think that Pakistan has suffered from both the man-made disaster and the natural disasters. The man-made disasters by the politicians, by the deep state, by the army, by the intelligence, by their support to terrorism as an instrument of their foreign policy, and a zero-sum game with India. Now, these are the things that are very costly propositions. And despite the fact that India had tried several times, taken several initiatives, to normalize relations, to go for talks. Every time the talk was initiated from the India side, it met with another terrorist attack from Pakistan. And there was no solution from Pakistan, while everybody knows who these terrorists are, where they are. One of them, Abdul Rahim Maki, has been only today declared a terrorist. So they are the basically the state guests living in that country. So nothing can happen on that front. Now that, as Michael mentioned, the Prime Minister was recently in the UAE, and he went beseeching the Emiratis to roll over the $2 billion facility and also to give some more money. He wanted 2 billion, he got 1 billion return. But what he has got more was from Saudi Arabia again to carry forward. Now, China has given almost nearly $30 billion in debts to Pakistan. And CPEC is very important, but China is having its considerations with regard to security of its own personnel along the line that they want to draw within as per CPEC in Pakistan. So that's where there is a little bit of a problem for them. Secondly, their economy is slowing down. They are having their own problems. So they are also recalibrating their own situation. But that does not mean that they're going to give up on Pakistan. In my view, they have done tremendous disservice to Pakistan by supporting or putting technical hold on the terrorists repeatedly whenever the 1267 committee tries to designate one or the other. So I don't see any change in his stance. These are all talks. And of course, UAE and Saudi Arabia both have been telling Pakistan to mend its ways. They have begun to realize that terrorism is really emanating from there. And therefore, they say that we must resolve your problems with India. And that's how this gentleman, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, comes and makes a statement that is nothing new, that is nothing. And the kind of conditionalities they put are non-negotiable.
Correct. So one imagines, Michael, that everything that Anil Trigunayat is pointing out as well, when you have a deep economic crisis, the politics may likely change, but that is not something that is actually happening here. Though what we are hearing is that they've learned their lesson after 3 wars with India. There is that strong political angle, but a military confrontation, there is no rocket science to it, that the country just cannot afford it. But would you say their concentration on defense spending has been one of the biggest reasons why Pakistan has landed itself in this situation? And do you see them correcting it anytime soon, if at all that's been the case?
Well, indeed. I mean, there are many reasons why Pakistan's economy is chronically ill, so to speak, and it's why we have these cyclical periods of every few years. Pakistan has a terrible economic crisis, and indeed, the disproportionate amount of spending on the military is one factor. But there's a lot of factors as well. I think you have to go and look at issues such as Pakistan's unwillingness to diversify its export mix, depending on garments, a textile industry that for many years has not been able to compete with other with competitors elsewhere in the world. You have to look at the chronic lack of government revenue, and that's in great part because of poor taxation policies. Few people pay taxes. And it's also, quite frankly, because of elite capture, because of the fact that for decades, the Pakistani elite have never been willing to invest in the masses through universal education and so on. So there are a lot of factors and just a lot of bad policy. And unfortunately, what we've seen again and again, and we're seeing it this time around as well, is a recourse to the same type of short-term band-aid policies that shore Pakistan over for a brief period of time, only until things explode again down the road. And that entails getting bailout assistance from Pakistan's dependable partners in the Gulf and at times China, as well as IMF assistance. So I think that clearly Pakistan would need to undergo a number of major liberalization, economic reforms. There need to be major changes within the leadership structure on the whole in order to get Pakistan on a better track. So indeed, I think that your point about defense spending is certainly one factor, a disproportionate spending on defense. That's one factor explaining why we've had these chronic economic struggles in Pakistan. But there's so many other factors as well. And I should just say that one other reason why we may be hearing this messaging from the Prime Minister of Pakistan looking to the idea of better relations with India is that he likely recognizes that perhaps there could be some economic advantages from Pakistan's perspective of trying to open up more border trade with India, particularly in terms of importing foodstuffs. Pakistan, of course, had terrible floods last year. which led to the destruction or damage of large numbers of key food crops. But each time that there's been reports that that may be coming, the Pakistani government has sort of backed down on that front. So I think we need to keep in mind that potential angle of Pakistan looking at reopening up some border trade with India, though I'm not inclined to think that that's going to go forward.
Well, it may not go forward because there would be resistance from the Indian side. Anil Trigunayat, what's your perspective on this? Because Pakistan clearly, like Michael is pointing out as well, it's facing its worst ever flour crisis. Parts of the country reporting a shortage of wheat. There are stampedes that we've reported on from several areas in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, from Sindh, from Balochistan provinces. And these prices of wheat and flour have skyrocketed amidst this ongoing economic crisis in the country. So one wonders how deep the economic crisis has to run before they actually make a direct attempt at opening up border trade with India, because if perhaps that is the reason, can it be brought to fruition in your understanding?
Well, I think that the trade border was basically closed by Pakistan. They are the only ones who withdrew the MFN status also on their own. And so I believe that if there was proposals every time, as Michael said, is there comes up that the border trade should be opened up, because naturally the trade is far more important for them also, especially at this time. And rather than getting things via the Gulf or some other countries makes things very expensive. And a lot of Indian stuff goes into Pakistan via the Gulf. But so direct trade is always beneficial. But that will depend upon them. India had even offered the assistance during the floods, during the pandemic, and every time the Pakistanis thought it below its dignity to accept that. And even the assistance that India was trying to send to Afghanistan was held up till the Afghans told the Pakistanis that you better clear it. Now, so that kind of a mindset, if it is there, I don't see a great change taking place on the ground. But of course, if the trade opens, that will be beneficial for them. And it will be better for the economy and early salvation.
Well, this is a developing situation, but the kind of headlines that a Pakistan Prime Minister's statements really grabs when he says that they've learned their lesson, that perhaps is only in the political rhetoric sphere, and perhaps more needs to come out of Pakistan if they want to change the situation that they find themselves in economically right now. But Michael and Mr. Trigunayat, it's always a pleasure chatting with you, getting your perspective. Thanks very much for making the time for speaking to us here on India Tonight.